Growing up, I was afraid of the dark. Now I know why. I've never been a fan of the dark. When I was a kid, I would wake up in hysterics drenched in sweat. Even when there were 5 plugged in, my parents would awake to the cries of no, please don't leave me. Medication didn't help therapy. My parents were at their wits' end. Eventually, as I got older, the night terrors would subside somewhat and peaceful sleep returned. I never could sleep in total darkness, however. A light from the hall, glaring videos from my phone, or draping myself in the blue light of television. Whatever it took to stave off the void. Over the summer, my parents went on an extended vacation and asked me to house sit for them. Having just graduated and wandering aimlessly as I fumbled to get my career on track, I didn't really have a reason to say no. My folks lived in a 2-story on the outskirts of town. Not out of the way, but a decent walk from the nearest neighbor. It was a warm June, and as I upped the den, I realized I had nothing to do but watch and job search. All my friends were on their own rich kid-fueled vacations, and I didn't even have enough money for takeout. I reflected on this grim outlook as the news blared in the background, and I scrolled through Indeed for listings. Before I knew it, it was dusk, the tangerine haze starting to creep in. That's when I first heard it. I paused in my self-loathing, looking puzzled. I muted thee and focused on it. Something was shuffling around somewhere. It sounded like it was coming under the floorboards. Ridiculous, of course. My parents didn't have a cellar. They just put all their trash and family memories out in the shed. Louder now, it was coming from under the stairs. My heart sank, remembering the dank under the stairs. You could walk right in. The circuit breaker was located in it after all. But to tread further, one would have to get on their hands and knees and slip into a tight cubby. Then they would gain access to the skeleton of the house. I shuddered at that thought, dismissing the sound as a rodent trapped in the walls. Not very brave of me, I know, but I avoided that like the plague as a kid. One time I had woken up in the night, another night terror, but my parents were nowhere to be found. My safety nets were out as well. I was alone in the pitch. I could hear my father cursing from downstairs, but I was too frightened to call out for him, let alone head down. Instead, I tried to calm myself and focus on the moonlight drifting in from the windows. It was faint, hidden by branches and clouds, but it was trying to burst through. As long as I had the moon, I wasn't truly cast into the dark. The shadows danced to the tune of my overactive imagination, little imps swaying back and forth in the night. Tucked away in the corner was one shadow larger than the rest. It was shapely and tall. It loomed in the corner like an uninvited guest. My little eyes were glued to it as the figure started to rise. It grasped the corner of the with unseen arms like it was ready to pounce. Then a click from downstairs, the night lights returned. The figure vanished. The wailing resumed. My mind was flooded with memories now, of shadows lurking and that knowing feeling of being watched. Losing myself in introspection, I heard the sudden hiss of the snapping off and found myself alone in a room full of dying light. Panic started to set in, and I immediately turned on the flash on my phone. Glancing around the room, I heard the chittering resume. Bang, I jumped at the sound, my heart drowning in my chest as I realized it was the door slamming open. As the sun set, the sounds of some unseen thing grew bolder. It was under me, besides me, above me. At times it sounded like the thing was in me. I could feel my breath start to choke on itself, and I rushed forward, desperate to turn the power back on. I slid and skittered on the ancient hall carpet as I hyperventilated. I could feel the nothing begin to crush me. I raised my light towards the door. It was hanging ajar, the sound emitting deep within the bowels of the house. For a moment, I thought of just leaving, just getting into my car, booking it to the nearest hotel. But then that wouldn't be rational. That would be the actions of a cowardly 22-year-old who still sleeps with the light on. I froze in the hall, trying to collect myself. This was it, I told myself. I was going to puff up my chest and march into the crawl space. This sound probably wasn't even real. It was probably my own mind hyping up my hysteria. Today was the day I stopped being afraid of the dark. How naive I was. As I approached the door, I was overwhelmed by the musty stench of old wood and cobwebs. I aimed my flashlight down and expected the dust-covered floor. Messy dots like someone were dragging their fingers along the floor disturbed the muck. I brushed that off and stepped in. I was hunched over immediately, the ceiling cutting off a foot below my height. Ahead of me was a wall to my left and the breaker in front of me. The lid dangled open, like someone had torn it out in a hurry. My heart fluttered. I hurried over to inspect it. The fuse box was completely torn apart, wires laying in a tangled mess and breakers smashed to bits. To my right, I turned to face the angled cubby, glancing down to see something long and hairy drag itself across the floor. I nearly dropped my phone in shock. I turned to run, and the door slammed shut. No, 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 oh God, no, I cried out in panic. I at the door to no avail. I was huffing and puffing like a madman, clawing at the door until my fingers bleed. I collapsed to the ground, grasping at my chest. The air grew heavy, the stench of decayed skin particles and mold beginning to take my nostrils hostage. As I buried my head in my knees, tears starting to swell, I heard it once more. I shuddered at the sound, like fangs gnashing against each other. I glanced up, my eyes adjusting to the total black. The sound was coming from the cubby. It was beckoning to me, a siren's lure if I ever heard one. I ran through the options in my mind. I was trapped in this glorified walk-in closet. The only way out was to go deeper. I tried to be reasonable. Whatever, it was probably an animal that had gotten in through a hole in the wall or something. A raccoon at worst. If it got in, there must be a hole somewhere, right? I could stuff myself in and escape this hell. Looking back, it was an awful choice, but it was the only one I had. I shone the light towards the cubby. It looked like I could squeeze in there, no problem. Holding my breath, I steadied myself and slowly shuffled towards it. With a grunt, I jabbed myself in there, my shoulders pinching my chest at the entrance. I ignored the sound and moved forward, pushing myself like a worm wriggling in the mud. The light paved the way, dust dancing in the air as I along. I batted cobwebs and tendrils of matted fur out of my way as I made my way. I soon found myself at the space between walls. The smell of sealant and puffy drywall wafted towards me. I jutted forward, my foot caught on something. I couldn't claw myself out without both hands, but that would mean throwing my phone aside. It would mean facing the chittering dark. I closed my eyes and tossed my phone forward. I heard it clutter to the floor a few inches away. I grabbed the top of the cubby and quickly twisted myself as best I could. I could only turn about halfway, but I felt my foot and kicked off whatever it was caught on. With a grunt, I pulled myself out of the cubby and into the skeleton of the house. I quickly turned and noticed my phone was a few inches further than where I tossed it. The space between the walls was surprisingly easy to move around in, and I strode over to the beacon of light at a brisk pace. Then the phone moved. I froze. Had I imagined that? I must have. The phone then moved again, quickly now like it was running away on two legs. It was turning a corner, leaving me stranded. I swore and chased after it like a dog with a bone. I slammed into the wall at first, shaking the foundations. Yet I was still close to the light. As long as I was close to it, I was fine. The thing was, it kept trying to escape from me. The phone was luring me deeper into the labyrinth of fiberglass. Turn after turn, mile after mile, I batted webbings and insulation out of my face. I was laser-focused on my accursed phone. The inside of the walls stunk to high heavens, like poison and a strong perfume. I was scurrying along with the phone, ignoring the and no of the thing that lurked in here with me. I just had to get to the light. I was safe there. As long as there was light, I was alone. I almost tripped over myself as the device came to a sudden stop. The smell was strong here, rancid yet sweat and inviting. I paused and reached down to pick up my phone. I squinted at the solid beam of light spotting my vision. I almost didn't see the long-clawed fingers slowly reach beside me and pick up the phone. My hand shook as my eyes followed the light. The bottom of the thing was hairy and spider-like. It was like someone had taken a tarantula and blown it up to life size. It twitched its mandibles, as if coveting the air around me. Attached where the eyes of the spider would be was a long, thin torso. It was feminine in features, its skin leathery and ripe. It had long, broad shoulders that ended with curled fingers and terrifyingly long nails. It had silk-like hair, the color of ravens, that covered its pale face. As it brought the phone to its head, I saw that it was featureless. A blank canvas, yet I could tell it was glaring at me. With hate or desire, I could not tell. It outstretched its arms as best it could, and I could hear the voice of the spider monster in my head. "Embrace me, Billy," it cooed. The voice was heaven, like a nostalgic mix of all my old flames. It beckoned me closer, luring me in with 1,000 promises and wants. I hesitated, and it sensed it. I could hear Horrid giggling in my mind as it began to crush the phone in its hand. As the light disappeared and the spider's form faded into the shadows, I heard that god-awful chittering noise. The voice in my head spoke once more. "Run then, little rabbit." Finally, I screamed as the thing hissed and lunged at me. I could feel its fuzzy limbs trying to dig into me as the giggling in my mind turned ever sinister. I pushed it off me with great force and got up as quickly as I could. I was lost in the dark, the skittering of spiders all around me. They were gnashing their fangs, scuttling about and weaving their traps for me. I ran, I slammed into walls, and every time I felt safe, I felt the touch on my back. I felt her breath on my neck. It stank of meat, and pheromones. I pushed it back as best I could, forcing myself deeper and deeper into the everlasting tunnels. I could hear whispers in the dark, telling me such awful things. They wanted me to join them to join her. I muttered no over and over again, but they just wouldn't stop. The air was hot, it was blasting me in the face as I ran. I was cutting myself on the fiberglass, the taste of iron clung to my lungs. My heart was boxing my insides. I was surrounded on all sides by the thing. I could hear it inside. I clawed at my ears to get it to stop. Tap, tap, CRRKT, CRRKT, CRRKT. Shut up, I screamed at the top of my lungs. I pushed forward, and my eyes stung at the sight of sudden light. I collapsed to the ground in a heap and heard gasps of shock and confusion. I was crumpled on the ground, coughing up drywall and screaming, my voice raspy and full of dust and sick. My parents helped me up, concerned at first but then horrified at the state of me. My father was on the phone with someone, saying to send an ambulance and that I had just fell out of the wall. I was dazed and confused. They had just left. What were they doing back so fast? Why did I feel so weak and hungry? My eyes struggled to adjust to the light, and my mom held me and wept. Apparently, I had been trapped inside the walls for 7 days. After 3 days of calling me with no response, my parents got on the first flight back and found no trace of me. They were calling the police in a panic when I had burst through the wall half crazed. I tried to explain what had happened, what I had seen back there in the walls, but the silent, judgmental looks my parents told me all I needed to know. There was a long talk, and it was decided I needed to take some time for myself and get some help. That was 3 weeks ago now. My parents have only visited me twice. They could barely meet my eyes. The doctors say I'm making progress, and soon I'll be ready to go home. Maybe they're right, maybe it was all in my head. I sleep in a padded room at night, the only light creeping in from the moon and slightly under my door. I see shadows under it sometimes, orderlies probably. Sometimes the shadows linger, and I hear that sound once more. It's all in my head, I'm sure of it. It still calls to me in my dreams. I haven't told the doctors. Sometimes I hear it in the walls, that familiar chitter. I suppose time will tell if I'm crazy or night the next time I fall asleep in total darkness. If I don't wake up again, well then, I guess I wasn't crazy.